The Nigerian oil and gas industry has frequently been in the news for various reasons. Decades before the Petroleum Industry Act, PIA, was enacted in August 2021, the country's oil and gas exploration sector faced significant challenges due to unclear rules, changing policies, and low investor confidence. Recently, there was a change in the boards and management of the two industry regulators, the Nigerian Upstream Petroleum Regulatory Commission, NUPRC, and the Nigerian Midstream Downstream Regulatory Agency, the NMDPRA. While speaking during a stakeholders meeting last week in Lagos, the Chief Executive Officer of the Nigerian Upstream Petroleum Regulatory Commission, Orishemeyowa Eyeson, outlined the agenda for repositioning Nigeria's upstream petroleum sector with a focus on production optimization, revenue expansion, and regulatory efficiency. She said her vision for the upstream sector rests on three pillars: production optimization, revenue expansion, regulatory predictability, and speed and safe, governed, and sustainable operations. Well, according to her, the agenda aligns with President Bola Tinubu's Renewed Hope initiative and the administration's production targets of 2 million barrels of oil per day by 2027 and 3 million barrels per day by 2030. Joining us on the show today to discuss ways we can improve, regulate, and boost our oil and gas sector is Dr. Evar Umeozor, a global oil and gas expert. He's a founder of Proctem, that's a pioneering project economics modeling SaaS application for upstream and downstream oil and gas project economics modeling analysis, which also includes all the regimes of Nigeria's upstream economic fiscal analysis. So given this, he will also share his thoughts on the impact of the U.S. invasion of Venezuela on the global oil market. Good morning and welcome to the program today.
Good morning.
Morning.
It's my pleasure to be here this morning.
Dr. Umeozor, let's go from the general to the particular. The biggest news in recent times is the U.S. invasion of Venezuela and seizure of what President Trump refers to as sanctioned vessels. And of course, the U.S. has taken about $500 million worth of Venezuelan oil. Now, what do you think will be the impact on the oil and gas industry internationally in the short term and the long term? And then is there any implication for Nigeria, particularly at this time that Nigeria is doing licensing round and licensing bid rounds and looking for investors from all over the world?
Thank you so much, Dr. Abati, for having me on the show. It's my pleasure to be here, viewers at home. First of all, I would like to say that this morning I'm going to be sharing my personal perspectives, and the ideas and the opinions that I share today are basically mine and not from any of my affiliations. I would say if you look at the global oil system, we basically categorize the oil supplies globally based on the density and the sulfur content. So on the density part, we grade the oils using what we call the degree of API gravity. So the degree of API gravity, which tells you how dense the oil is, so it can go from 0 up to maybe in the 50s, right? 50 degrees API gravity. So now, so the higher the API gravity, the less dense the crude is. So now, the crude oil from Venezuela, we all know it's like they have a huge reserves, but it is predominantly of the crude that has a lower API, which is very dense, right? So typically we categorize these crudes on the scale of density and API, where we say we categorize heavy crude as crudes that have 25 degrees API or less. And then we have what we call the medium crude in terms of the density, which are the ones that have the API degree of API gravity of from 25 to around 34. And then you have the heavy crudes, which are the ones that have API gravity of from 34 and above. Now, the other metric that's also used to categorize crude is the other metric that's used is also the sulfur content, right? So now the sulfur content, typically we would categorize this crude into two. So we have the sweet and the sour. So the sweet crude is one that has a lower sulfur content. So, and we normally use a threshold of about 0.6% volume of sulfur in the crude. So if the sulfur content is below 0.6% of the volume, we say it is sweet. If it's higher than that, we say it is sour. So on this basis, we categorize all global crudes into 6 different types. So the first, which is the one that is of interest now, especially as pertaining Venezuela, is the heavy sour crude. So the heavy sour crude, which means high density and high sulfur content. So, and then you have the heavy sweet crude, which is high density and low sulfur content. And you also have the medium sour, the medium sweet, the light sweet, and the light sour. Now, with regards to Venezuela, Venezuela's crude is predominantly of the Venezuelan supply is predominantly of the heavy sour grade.
All right, I just want to butt in at this stage, at the risk of the conversation becoming a little bit too technical for some of us who are not specialists in this subject area. Thank you for, giving those categorical differences, because they matter when we're looking at where oil prices are going to go, given the impact of what we're seeing in Venezuela, potential of tension flaring up in Iran, and of course other factors. So I'd love to get your analysis. Where do you see the price of oil going this year? And secondly, do you foresee in 2026 us being able to make any real sustainable inroads at reducing the production price per barrel here in Nigeria? Because we know that that's one of the most sticking points that's that's stopping us from really being able to enjoy the benefit of our oil revenue, and is also a hindrance to investment.
So the issue and the reason I wanted to lay that background is because the type of crude determines the price, especially the break-even price, which is the cost of supplying that crude. And also the type of crude determines the type of refining that it needs. Now, the US going into Venezuela, and in the hopes that we would have a lot of supply of heavy sour crude, which is currently predominantly now supplied from Canada, right? So Canada supplies about 2 million barrels, 1.8 million barrels per day of this heavy sour to the US. And if you look at the break-even price in terms of when you take into account all the costs that are needed to produce each barrel, for Canada is around $36 per barrel. For the Venezuelan, the same heavy sour from Venezuela currently is around $39 per barrel. Now, if you just oppose that with Nigeria predominantly we produce mostly medium sweet and light sweet crude, right, which are split almost 50-50%. And if you look at the supply cost of that, the break-even price is around $34 per barrel, which is apparently lower than that of the crude coming from Canada or coming from Venezuela. Now, the total volumes currently coming from Venezuela before the US issue with the US or US taking Maduro away from the country was around 1 million barrels, right? And of which this 1 million barrels, about 45% of that volume was going to China. And only about 10% currently goes to the US. Whereas the Canadian production, about 85% of that production from Canada goes to the US, and only about 10% or 14% of that goes to China from Canada. So we are seeing, recently we saw China and Canada signing a trade agreement that's worth about $1 trillion. So what we are seeing, if the US manages to control the supplies from Venezuela, what would happen, what I expect to see is that perhaps the Canadian crude can be redirected, more of the volumes from Canada can go to China. But also, in the short term, I think we saw reaction from the market where prices seem a bit depressed right now and the reason is because there is this expectation of over 300 billion barrels of reserves coming into the market. But I mean, that's not going to be easy to come into the market because first of all, we see, like I mentioned, the break-even price you need to produce this heavy sour from Venezuela is really high. And if you take into account factors like the country risk, because I mean, historically, Venezuela was known to have seized assets for various producers who invested in the country. So you have the country risk, which could potentially impact on the willingness of investors to come in.
Okay.
Now, if you bring that down, if you bring that in the context of Nigeria.
Yeah. Finish up the point, Dr.
So in the context of Nigeria as well. Yeah, in the context of Nigeria, you see, like the heavy sour is not the type of grade that's produced here. So in terms of grade competitiveness, Nigeria doesn't have any direct competition with Venezuela or Canada on this aspect. But overall, in terms of overall supplies coming into the market, when there is a market sentiment of excess supply in the market, this would depress prices. But then the excess supply coming into the market will require a lot of investment, which will require also time. Okay. And there's a lot of other factors that go into actually bringing that supply into the market.
All right, Dr. Ivar, I mean, thank you so much for your analysis. It just shows it's not going to work because the price of producing the crude in Venezuela is about $88. They're selling for about $24. Chevron has said they're not going to make investment in that because, like you said, country risk exists. And it's not going to really cause any real depression in the market. I mean, the last time America churned out their crude from their national reserves, I think it was about 0.15 cents to about 0.05 cents or 0.50 cents. I mean, that's the add-on to the market. So there's not going to be anything much. I want you to talk about the bid rounds in Nigeria. How do we maximize that process effectively?
Yeah, so with regards to the big rounds, at the end of the day, what we are trying to do, the expectation in Nigeria, the desire in Nigeria is to attract investment. Attracting investment in Nigeria means you have to create the enabling environment for investors to come. Investors need to feel that their investment will be secure and issues with pipeline disruptions and, I mean, theft of crude oil would be minimized, and the fiscal regimes that actually becomes operative would be one that is favorable for investors to make return on their investments. So on that regard, all the recent changes and with the PIA coming in, with the law designed in a way to improve attractiveness, investment attractiveness in Nigeria. And also with the open bidding rounds that's been introduced to bring more, make more transparency and make it more, provide the data that's required for potential investors to be able to understand the economic returns that could potentially be garnered from their investment in Nigeria. These are positives. But also the ability to be able to run physical simulation scenarios, in some of your recent interviews, you've had like guests here who talk about the need to have a national model, upstream fiscal model that enables you to run fiscal simulations and scenarios to understand the implications of various cost structures on investment attractiveness, on the supply competitiveness of Nigerian crude in the international market. So now we have these tools, which has been developed under the Proctem umbrella, that enables you to automatically run these fiscal scenarios from anywhere using a cloud-based system. You can understand how various cost structures, both from the angle of the government and the angle of the investor,
Dr.
to
Umeozor.
understand the economic implications of that.
Okay, Dr. Umeozor. I mean, some of those things that you said, the NUPRC in Nigeria should do to provide an enabling environment. I think Mrs. Eyisan said as much. But you now mentioned Proctem, which is the fiscal, analysis tool system that you founded. I tried to look for you on social media, on the internet. I couldn't find, Proctem there. Maybe it's my phone that is misbehaving. Some of these phones are old models. Just tell us very briefly what Proctem is all about. And you already started. And now...
So, yeah, Proctem is yes, so Proctem is a fiscal upstream economic simulation tool that enables you to run physical simulations for all the various upstream regimes that we've had in Nigeria, whether it's production sharing, the recent PIA contracts. So we have all the 5 upstream fiscal regimes that enables you to see investments under various cost structures, under various funding scenarios, how that translates to return on investment for investors, the government revenues as well, in this case, like revenues flowing into NNPC. And also, if you're an auditing firm, you can also understand how various cost composition and cost structures impact on revenues of both government and investors. So Proctem is available online. The website is www.proctem.com, and is a tool that's accessible. Is a tool that's accessible. You can actually go on there. All you need to do is provide the asset profile. So all you need to do is provide asset profile, what your production profile is.
Fantastic. I think those who engage with it will delve deeper, but thank you for that insight, into some new technology as well as into the general state of the oil and gas industry in Nigeria and globally.